good. So I'm going to sound like a broken record here to start off, but I am honored to be standing up here, being a part of this program, being a part of Rev 250. I won't go into it. You've already heard about the people, but I do want to say my thanks as well to Cliff and everybody here at the FDR Library, Doris Harrington and the DAR. Hi, Doris. Really appreciate your support of this program, and everybody at the Dutchess County Historical Society, Bill, Melody, Andy's here. I know there's some other board members. I've been doing this for a few years, and they've been nothing but the most supportive team that I could ever ask for, helping me out with stuff. So thank you. So, Richard Montgomery. Last week I was talking to Bill Jeffway, and one of the things that we talked about is, wow, this guy only lived in the county for about 2.5 years. But he was really, really important to the county in that 2.5 years. Why is that? And that's what I hope to elaborate on a little bit today. When I first started this project, I was thinking about a title, and 2 words kept popping up again and again in the biographies and the accounts of it. Those 2 words were brave and reluctant. And I went with brave because there is no doubt that this is a brave, brave man. And many of the facets of his leadership come through his personal acts. But there's also no doubt that he was a somewhat reluctant revolutionary. And I want to talk about that a little bit as we get into the program. So, who was this guy? Well, he was an Irishman. He was born in Ireland in December of 1738 into a family of Irish nobility that could trace their ancestry back to the Norman invasions. He particularly was very fond of citing his relationship to the Count de Montgomery, who was the guy who jousted with Henri II in, 1670-some, and ended up killing the French king. That was one of the factors that started the Wars of the French Revolution. Gotta love it. He had a typical upbringing, private tutors growing up. At the age of 16, he enrolled in Trinity College in Dublin. But after 2 years, on the urging of his father and his older brother, he decided to purchase a commission in the British Army. And so joined the British Army as an ensign in June of 1756. Now, if we know anything about 1756, that is the beginning of the 7 Years' War. In America, it was known as the French and Indian War. And he was very, very active in that conflict. The next map I put up is going to be kind of busy. Bear with me, I have a purpose in doing this. By the end, when I'm done with some of the animations, you're going, oh man, that makes my head hurt. That's going to kind of be the point, and I'll explain why. He served in America for most of that war. He got his commission in 1756. Early the next year, he sailed from Ireland with his unit, the 17th Regiment of Foot, to America. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the years, but I want to trace his actions during the 7 Years' War. In 1757, he arrived in Halifax, went from there to New York City, right up to Crown Point, where he wintered. Back to New York City, back to take part in 1759 in the siege and combat at Louisburg. This was his first experience to combat. By all accounts, he demonstrated proficiency and bravery. There were a number of casualties in the 17th, and as soon as the fortress was captured, he was promoted to lieutenant. From there, he came to Boston, then back to Crown Point, to Philadelphia for a winter, back up to Crown Point. Then we get into 1760, late 1759, early 1760. He spends about a year campaigning in eastern New York, up the Hudson River Valley, up into Canada. The same places that he would be spending so much time on during 1775. Gained tremendous experience for the terrain, for many of the places that he was going to be at. Back down to Crown Point. Then they wintered at Fort Stanwix in the Mohawk Valley. Then the 17th was ordered to go to the Caribbean. They went to Barbados, then Martinique, where they took place in a battle at Port Royal to capture it from the French. then to Havana, Cuba, where he was involved, the 17th was involved in some more serious fighting as well. It was during this part of the fighting that he was named the regimental adjutant of the 17th Regiment. That is normally reserved for the most talented lieutenant that is out there. After Havana, back up to New York City. He is promoted to captain and given one of the companies in the 17th. So he is promoted to captain within 6 years of being in the service. That's very, very fast. He has seen combat in a number of places. He goes from New York City to Fort Niagara. Pontiac's rebellion is breaking out. Goes from Fort Niagara to Detroit. Spends about a month in Detroit. By this time, we're in 1763, and he's starting to get worn down. I just looked at my notes and realized I forgot one thing, because on this voyage that he took up from New York City in 1763 to go into the valley to get ready for Pontiac's rebellion, the unit stopped, or the officers stopped, at a landing in northern Dutchess County. At the time it was Dutchess County, a place called Claremont. And it was there that Richard met the daughter of Robert Livingston, a young lady by the name of Janet. Now, there's no real accounts of what occurred at this meeting, but as you will see, it must have meant something, because they're going to renew their acquaintanceship in a few years. So, by the time he gets to Detroit in late 1763, he's tired, he's sick. He has been conducting combat operations pretty much straight for 6 years. He wants to take a break. After a couple of false starts with being able to take leave, he is given permission to return to New York City carrying dispatches, and then to return to England, where he arrives in late 1764 to begin his leave of absence from the 17th. That's a busy map. The reason I put it up there, though, is look at all of the experience that he was able to get. He is traveling through not only most of the places where he's going to be experiencing combat in 1775, he is meeting a wide range of American people from many different places. He is seeing what the frontier looks like. And more importantly, he is meeting, during Pontiac's rebellion, he is a prime negotiator with the native tribes. He is learning how to engage with Indians. That's going to prove very, very important in the years ahead. Now, when he was in England, shortly after he returned to England, the 17th is ordered back to England, so he's not away from his regiment. He contemplates selling his commission. Eventually he does in 1772. Why he does this? Well, there's a few reasons. Number one, promotions are very, very slow at the end of the 7 Years' War. The army is drawing down. There's not as many opportunities. The other thing, he's junior in rank. He was promoted to captain very quickly at about 6 years. It's going to be another maybe 15 to 20 years before he makes major, based on seniority, and more importantly, number three, have some sort of protector, have some sort of benefactor who can speak for you and get you that commission. He didn't feel he had anybody. In late 1771, the position of a major in a different regiment opened up. He was encouraged to apply. He put 1,100 pounds down to purchase it, and it went to somebody else. Made him furious. That was the final straw. The following year, he sold his commission and decided that he was going to go to America. And as a man with little money cuts but a bad figure in this country among peers, nabobs, etc., etc., I have cast my eyes on America, where my pride and poverty will be much at their ease. He arrived in New York City in late 1772, and he wasn't a poor man. He had sold his captain's commission for 1,500 pounds. He had also saved a great deal of money while trying to buy a major's commission, and he had some residual money from his family's estates in Ireland. So he had some opportunities. And he decided to buy 67 acres in Kingsbridge, in what at the time was Westchester County. Right now, I've put a box around it. This is in New York City where it's at, just on the Bronx side of the Harlem River. Pretty much everything is underneath the Major Deegan Expressway right now. But that was his original property. Now, he didn't live there very long because he determined that he wanted to be a gentleman farmer. And in order to do that, he wanted to integrate with society. Now, how best to do that? Well, he remembered this fine young lady that he had met in the Hudson Valley, and he reestablished a relationship with her. Again, we don't know a lot about how they reintegrated or how they met each other again, but they both seemed to be looking forward to it. They met very quickly after he returned to America, and he engaged in a courtship with her. Now, by this time, Janet Livingston, the Livingston family is one of, if not the most wealthy family in New York State at the time. They are one of the most socially upstanding. They are in sort of a competition with the Delanceys of New York City, but they are very prominent. The family of the Livingstons has been very, very protective of Janet. She is, at this time, 30 years old. She is single, and she's really rich. Owns a lot of property. There had been at least 4 occasions where suitors had approached her seeking matrimony. And either because of her, because of her family, because of both, none of them were acceptable. Richard, however, was acceptable to them. And he was able to earn the trust of Robert Livingston, gain his acceptance, and his approval to become a son-in-law. This is a short quote. Thank you to the Claremont State Historical Site that has this posted on their website, a statement that Janet gave later in life to a niece about her meeting her future husband. It was his 18th year, but close enough. So they had a very quick romance. The approval for the marriage was given on the 21st of June, 1773. They were married a month later. And they settled in Rhinebeck. Now, in Rhinebeck, this is an opportunity to demonstrate the map that you saw out there displayed. This is a cool map. If you haven't had a chance to really look at it, go out there and take a look. It was done 1780 by William Cockrell, as the placard says out there, a Scottish surveyor, the New York State surveyor during this time. This is a rare artifact. And, okay, quick plug. Thank you for all your donations to the County Historical Society, because it's only through your support that they are able to acquire fantastic artifacts like this. This isn't the only one. Go up to Rhinebeck and see all of the fantastic stuff they got. All right, I'm back off my sales pitch. I'm back on here. So they are going to settle on this land, and they're decided to build an estate in this block of land that is owned by Janet Livingston. This map roughly is north-facing. This is the old post road, roughly 9G. It's not exact, but you can kind of get a sense south of the town of Rhinebeck. While they are building this new estate, they've got to have a place to live. And we have a couple of really neat observations from this period of their life. We know, this is a map from 1797. They lived in a little small house in Rhinebeck proper, specifically at what is now 88 Montgomery Street in Rhinebeck, right across from the Northern Dutchess Hospital. This is an old map. Didn't want to do that yet, sorry. This is a north is facing to our left here in this map. This, where it says Montgomery over here, this is what is going to become Grassmere. And this is the location of where that house actually was. Now, I think many of you have seen the house. This is the General Montgomery house that is currently in Rhinebeck. It was moved to this location in 1859 and has been well kept up by the DAR, the Chancellor Livingston chapter of the DAR. But they lived in this house while they were building Grassmere. Now, they did not finish Grassmere before Richard was called off to go to war. Now, initially, Richard did not really want to get involved in politics. He was done with all of the fighting. He just wanted to be a gentleman farmer. Now, he did have a very, very strong connection to the local revolutionaries, but he was certainly not a radical. There is one of the things I learned during this project is there's a lot of historiography out there about how much of a dedicated revolutionary he was. And it ranges, most people say he got much of his sentiment from the Livingstons. That's true. He married into this very important family. But some of the sources talk about the Livingstons being fire eaters, ready to, fight at a moment's notice. It's not really true. There were a number of loyalists within the Livingston clan, and I know our county historian Will Tatum has done a lot of research and a lot of work on that subject. But there is no doubt that he was very, very sympathetic to the cause. He made statements when he was in England that he would never take up arms against his countrymen, and he included Americans, Canadians in that category. He was violently opposed to the Stamp Act. He viewed it as an overreach of parliamentary authority, much in the same way that Parliament was trying to overreach themselves in Ireland. He was a Whig politically. He was an oppositionist. He was rather socially conservative. But he really hoped for accommodation. So he focused the 2 years that he was in Rhinebeck on becoming a gentleman farmer. And he was very successful. He built a grist mill. He experimented with crops. He was one of the first to plant potatoes, maybe from his Irish upbringing, who knows. Very valuable at the time. He was the first in the county to own a wheat harvesting machine instead of just using scythes. He owned a carriage, which was a sign of wealth during the era. He conducted numerous business transactions, expanding the land which the Montgomerys, he and his wife, now own. Purchases from the Livingston family as well as from the Beekman family, another very wealthy local family. The Beekmans were Janet's grandparents. She was a Beekman on her mother's side. During these years, he became integrated into high society in Dutchess County. And so it is not a surprise that as we come closer and closer to the Revolution, he is going to be drawn more and more into it. New York State developed a couple of different organizations, a couple of different bodies through 1774, 1775, the Committee of 50 in 1774, early 1775, the Committee of 60. He is not on either one of those. But after Lexington and Concord, in May of 1775, there is a provincial Congress in New York, and he is selected to be a member of it. He is not necessarily thrilled about this, but he feels he has a duty to conduct himself as a gentleman should, as an honorable gentleman should. Janet is proud of him, is proud that he's selected, but she fears the separation. One of the interesting things about Janet and Richard is they are both a little bit cynical. They're both a little bit fatalistic. Right after they got married, Janet had a dream that her husband was going to die in a sword fight with his brother. She was prone to some of these negative thoughts. He was too. But he was much more accepting. He felt that, whatever fate has in store, there's nothing I can do, and, life will be life. So they were very aligned in that way. The only real difference they had that we know of, and it wasn't a major difference, Richard did not want children. Janet did. Now, she was 30 years old. That's a little bit past the age when most women were starting to have children, but she still wanted children. It doesn't appear to be a major source of disgruntlement between the two, but it was something they did talk about. Richard was concerned about, what if I sire an idiot, was one of his comments to Janet. I know my parents have said that too, so that would So anyway, Richard goes to the Provincial Congress, and he throws himself into it. Janet said when he was getting ready to leave that Richard believes, quote, politics were nothing but noise and vexation. And Richard, that's an accurate representation, but when he got there, he threw himself into his duties. Most of his duties involved military planning. He was responsible for planning the defenses of the Hudson Highlands, on the committee that was planning the defenses of the Hudson Highlands. At which point they determined that one of the places that needed to be defended was his old Kingsbridge property that he had sold, but Fort Independence ended up going on that very site, one of the many Fort Independences. And there is supposedly one small piece of the original Fort Independence wall left. I think it's on like 238th Street down in the Bronx. I haven't been there. But he's also in charge of procuring tents and guns for the New York troops. He's in charge of the logistics, how to supply the New York troops. He is testing artillery. People know, not only do they know Montgomery as a social leader, but they know him as a military man. He's got a great reputation coming out of the 7 Years' War. So he's put in charge of these positions. Now, he's only in the Congress for a few weeks when, on the 6th of June, New York decides to name some officers, naming them to the position of generals. The senior general, Major General Philip Schuyler. And one of the brigadier generals is Richard Montgomery. 2 weeks later, the Continental Congress nominates one major general one major general from New York and 8 brigadier generals from all of the colonies. Schuyler is a major general. Richard Montgomery is named one of the Continental, so all of the colonies, one of their brigadier generals. Second in rank. Out of the 8, he's number 2, which means he's going to be doing something. He wants to serve with George Washington. George Washington says, no, based on your experience, we are going to send you north to be the second in command of Philip Schuyler as we prepare to invade Canada. You know that area, that's where you're from, that's where you can do the best work. Montgomery salutes and drives on. Again, not what he wanted, but he's going to do it. And he leaves relatively quickly. On the 7th of July, he is moving to go up to Albany to begin his service with what is at the time called the Separate Army. One of the things I love about this, projects like this, is when you are able to say that we are doing something on the exact same day that something else happened. And it's fitting that we are here with Rev 250, the 250th anniversary and commemoration. Well, 250 years ago today, on August the 17th, that's when Richard Montgomery arrived at Fort Ticonderoga to take up his position as the second in command of the Separate Army. 250 years ago from today, right now. I just think that's kind of cool. And when he gets up there, he finds kind of a ragtag group of soldiers. One of the things I like to do when I'm giving a presentation like this, and if anybody has seen some of my Civil War presentations, I usually have a slide or two that talks about it. What did the army that he was in charge of look like? You can't do that with this particular campaign because it was constantly changing. Due to new troops coming in, enlistments running out, people getting sick, linking up with Benedict Arnold, it was a mess to keep track of, which is something that we'll talk about in a bit, is a credit to Montgomery that he was able to do it so well. Now, when he arrived, we're talking about Canada. Why are we going to invade Canada? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting a little out of my order. I did want to point out a couple more things. So this is, again, the problem. I look in the wrong thing in my notes and I get sidetracked. I did want to highlight a couple things about Grasmere. One of the things I wanted to point out, if you've ever been in the Rhinebeck post office, Ollendale's murals that are there, fantastic stuff. And here's the connection to the Wallace Center and the FDR Library. These were all painted during the New Deal with New Deal funds and New Deal projects. There are 8 of them commemorating different years. The 1774 year is a setting of what is going to become Grasmere. So you get a little look at what agricultural life might have been like. It is important to note also that the Montgomerys they did own slaves. We do not know exactly how many enslaved people were there on the Montgomery property, but we do know that they had enslaved people with them. Okay, now I can get to Canada. Sorry about that. Now, why Canada? Well, there's a few reasons that Canada is so prevalent in American planning. Number one, this thing called the Quebec Act just really upset a lot of Americans. It was passed in 1774 by the British Parliament, went into effect in 1775. It expanded the borders of Quebec well to the west and south, effectively cutting off colonial aspirations on the frontier. They could no longer extend out in that direction. It also set up a provincial governor appointed by the crown to be in charge of Quebec. Now that looked like a precedent that none of the colonies wanted to have come down to their home colonies. It also recognized Roman Catholicism. Ooh, that's not good. We don't want to recognize Roman Catholicism to us good Protestant colonists. It also seemed to indicate, well, if the British are controlling this area, they can really incite the Indians. And the native tribes can really create havoc in New England and on the frontier of New York and Pennsylvania. There was a sentiment that Canadians were kind of like us. They want to be free of the British. Therefore, they would welcome us with open arms. That didn't turn out to be true. Most of the Canadians were sort of the wait and see. We want to see how this turns out before we take a choice. Now, obviously, there were some who fell on one side or the other, but the majority were neutral, at least during the 1775 campaign. So once Montgomery gets to Fort Ticonderoga, he is, just like he did with the Provincial Congress, he jumps into things immediately. He arrived on the 17th, and immediately upon arriving, Philip Schuyler did something that would become common for him. He got sick and he left the army. Now, Philip Schuyler, he has a reputation. He gets sick a lot. He got sick here. In 1777, he gets sick again right before the Saratoga campaign, and he leaves. He is also not a very good combatant commander, but he's a really good logistician. And once he departs, he doesn't quit working. He is responsible for supplying Montgomery's army. So as we start to look at the Quebec campaign and see how successful it turns out, one of the reasons the Americans were able to go as far and as long as they did was because Schuyler kept sending them enough to keep working. And he did the same thing for Gates during the Saratoga campaign the following year. But Montgomery is put in charge. And after a few fits and starts, Montgomery begins the campaign. And as part of beginning the campaign, see, here again, I get caught up with my talking and I forget some slides. But a couple of key individuals here to look at. On the bottom right is a picture of Philip Schuyler. We just talked about him. His opponent, Sir Guy Carleton, who is the Captain General of Quebec. A very talented general. Some accounts say he is England's best general during the Revolutionary War. I think there's a case there. Montgomery knows Carleton. Carleton was a junior officer during the siege of Havana at the same time that Montgomery was there. They know each other. They have a great deal of respect for each other. This is a quote attributed to Richard Johnson right after he is promoted to brigadier general. Again, it gives an indication. We start to see this idea of reluctancy. I have described it myself, though entirely unexpected and undesired by me. But the will of an oppressed people compelled to choose between liberty and slavery must be obeyed. It demonstrates that sense of obligation, but the idea that, I don't really want to do this. I'd rather be back on my farm. He does have very high regard. I mean, even Schuyler. Schuyler holds him in very high regard. You can't really see the date there. That's September 20th. So shortly after Schuyler leaves the army for the last time, he leaves and comes back a couple times. Montgomery's really the one in charge. I cannot estimate the obligations I lie under to General Montgomery for the many important services he has done. Very highly thought of. So we begin the campaign. This is just a general overview of what the campaign looks like. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the military components here. I could. And those of you who know me know I could talk a long time about this. I want to stick to Montgomery himself. So we're going to go through it fairly quick, but just to give you an idea, there's a couple things going on here. The ultimate goal is Quebec. There are three main British settlements in Quebec. There's Montreal, Trois-Rivières, and Quebec. Those are the three that the colonists feel they need to capture. To do that, Schuyler and Montgomery is going to lead the main effort up the Hudson River Valley, Lake Champlain to the St. Lawrence, and then down the St. Lawrence. Meanwhile, Benedict Arnold is going to lead a force of about 1,000 men through the Maine wilderness. That is worth another program all in and of itself to talk about Arnold's amazing journey through the Maine wilderness. Excuse me. So as he begins, the first thing that needs to be done is to capture this place called Fort St. John. Now this says Fort St. Jean, the French term. When the British are occupying it, they call it St. John's. The bulk of the British Army in Canada, there's only about 1,500 troops from the British Army in Canada, only 2 regiments, the 7th and the 26th Regiments of Foot. About a third to a half of them are stationed at Fort St. John. So Montgomery feels that the first thing we have to do is take Fort St. John. He establishes a base of operation at an island a little bit further to the south, the Ile aux Noix. My French is not that good. I think I got that right. And he commences operations against Fort St. Jean. This is one thing he learns about the American army. He does not hold them in very high regard. He thinks they're brave, but my mortification and anxiety, the master of Hindustan could not recompense for the summer's work. Nothing shall ever tempt me again to hazard my reputation at the head of such ragamuffins. Honor, the very soul of the soldier, has no existence among us. He's writing to his brother-in-law. Oh gosh, the Americans drive him crazy. This is a guy who experienced life as a British regular. Discipline. There ain't none of that here. And he is very, very bothered by that. Now, another thing to note, this quote is from the 5th of October, which is sort of a low point for operations. The fighting at St. Jean it took 60 days to end up capturing the fort. And he was beset by many, many problems. The siege of the fort was very, very weak. The weather was atrocious. He was also in charge of finances, supplying the army, diplomacy with the locals, diplomacy with local Indians, and diplomacy within his own army. There were constant coming and going of New York troops and New England troops. They didn't like each other. He had to keep them away from each other. And the fact that he was able to be successful at all of those is truly amazing. Throughout September and October, there were a number of disciplinary issues which got him very depressed. Middle of October, things started to turn around a little bit. Just very quickly, a view of the Ile aux Noix. A couple images of Fort St. John's. The top one is from 1790. The bottom one's 1748. Okay, forget, this is me doing a quick PowerPoint slide to give you a little idea. It is not high speed. But just to give you an idea of how the siege went, on the 5th and 6th of September, Schuyler had rejoined the army, made a first attempt to storm the fort, failed miserably, and the army retreats. Montgomery comes back just a couple weeks later and establishes an artillery battery to the south. On the 14th of October, he establishes a second battery on the other side of the river. This one starts to prove kind of effective, where I said things start to turn around. It sinks a British ship in the Richelieu River. The next day, he sends an expedition up to another fort, Fort Chambly, which is located about 10 miles north of Fort St. John, manned by about 100 and some odd British soldiers. It is captured pretty much without a shot, and to include over 6 tons of gunpowder, which is a godsend to his army. It allows them to continue the campaign. Toward the end of October, he establishes a third battery. The combination of these 3 batteries ends up putting the fort in an untenable situation. On the 3rd of November, they surrender. Now we have to move on to Quebec. How are we going to move to Quebec? Quebec is, there's a picture of Fort Chambly. Now we've got to move to Quebec. Montreal falls relatively quickly. Carleton withdraws the troops that were in Montreal. The city founders, the city fathers come out. throw themselves on the mercy of Montgomery. He's very lenient with them, and they occupy the city unopposed on the 11th of November. He stays there for a couple of weeks, reorganizing his army, and then he moves to Quebec. Arnold had completed his trek through the wilderness on the 9th of November, and they link up. Now, Benedict Arnold was kind of a prickly character. Another sign that Montgomery was very, very tactful was he got along with Arnold. The two of them had very cordial relationships. Not too many people could say that about working with Benedict Arnold. Montgomery could. And now we've got to figure out what we are going to do with Quebec. It's early December. The same challenges are in existence. The siege of St. John, it was successful. It provided an American victory where there hadn't been any. We captured 500 British soldiers. But we had to discharge over 1,000 Americans because of illness. And reinforcements are only trickling in. Many of those reinforcements, the enlistments run out on the 31st of December. This is proving to be one of the most devastating winters in recent memory. And he has no artillery. He has about 20 pieces of artillery, all of it light artillery and mortars, whereas Carleton in Quebec has 140 cannons on the city walls. Quebec itself is a tough nut to crack. This is a view from the southeast. The city sits on a plateau with very steep cliffs. How do we end up getting after this city? It's not very easy. He determines that he has to conduct an assault. This is another view of the city from over top. And so this is the plan that Montgomery comes up with. He's got about 1,100 men. Carleton has a few more, maybe about 12 to 1,300 inside the city. Massively outgunned with artillery. The only way we're going to be able to get anything done is if we conduct an attack when we can surprise him and when he can't see us. That means we got to wait for a blizzard. And the plan is we're going to wait for a blizzard, and then this is what we're going to do. We're going to launch a feint, high diddle diddle right down the middle. And in the meantime, I'm going to send Benedict Arnold, 650 men, and they're going to go to the north, and they're going to work all the way around into the lower city, and we're going to link up with me, Richard Montgomery, leading a force of 350 men. That's the plan. On the night of the 27th of December, we get a blizzard. The preparation goes into effect, and all of a sudden the blizzard dies out. Cancel the attack. The British saw the preparations, I should add. The 30th of December, same thing happens. This time the attack goes ahead. And so what happens is the attack goes off at 4 o'clock in the morning. It launches. The British are not surprised. They were ready for something like this. They could see the lanterns bobbing in the distance. Sound travels on snow-packed terrain. They heard the Americans coming. Nobody was surprised. Arnold achieves a little bit of success. He makes it through an initial barricade that was set up to stop them. But then Arnold is wounded. He's shot in the ankle. A very painful wound that he has to leave the field. He turns command over to his second command, a colonel by the name of Daniel Morgan, insanely brave and very crazy individual who goes on to do many great things during the Revolution. They attack the second barricade, but they don't get there. They are unable to break through. They wait for reinforcements that never come. The reinforcements come to the British, and he is forced to surrender with about 600 men. The rest of the attack did not go through. Well, this is about 10 o'clock in the morning. Where the heck is Montgomery? Well, Montgomery led the attack in the south, and similar to the attack in the north, initial success. They came across the barricade. They made it through. They get ready to attack the second barricade. And as they approach the second barricade, Montgomery leading the way, sword in hand, they are met with a devastating volley that killed 16 people within 20 yards of the second barricade, including most of the officers in this column and Montgomery. He receives 3 very bad wounds. He receives a grape shot in both legs and through the chin. And he's killed immediately. Once the leadership is killed, they are unable to continue their attack, and they retreat into the battle. Now, this appears to be a big loss, and it was. Arnold, at the end of it, Arnold keeps, he's still able to stay in the field. He keeps a cordon around Quebec. I mean, where's he going to go? And he asks for help. Carleton doesn't push the issue. He doesn't want to fight in winter. He's happy. He's not going to starve out. Let me wait till spring when I get reinforcements, and then I'll take care of these guys. When the spring came, a couple quotes. And see, again, this is the 3rd time now. A couple quotes about the death of Montgomery from those who served with him. A very stylized picture of it. It didn't actually happen this way. Nobody found his body until the next day. But George Washington expressed sorrow. His chief surgeon, devastated. And most of the men were. Even though some of them weren't happy with his focus on discipline, they recognized him as being a very brave person. The rest of 1776, saw a slow retreat from Quebec. British reinforcements arrived, another 6 regiments. On the 2nd of May, on the 5th of May, the Americans start retreating. They evacuate Montreal in June and leave Canada altogether by the 24th of June when they leave St. John's. Over the summer, there's a recognition that the fight is going to occur on Lake Champlain. Both sides start building fleets. The British do a better job, and on the 11th of October, meet an American fleet, again under the command of Benedict Arnold, at a place called Valcour Island. It is a British victory. Within a week, the American fleet is completely destroyed. But this entire process had delayed the British for a long time. It is now late October. Carleton knows what it means to be caught a long, long way from your supply base in the middle of winter. He doesn't want to do that. He decides that he is going to retreat back into Canada and wait for the spring to start a new campaign. So, what did this campaign actually mean? When we look at Montgomery, I remember the first I ever heard of this campaign, it was like, oh yeah, we invaded Canada and we got our butts kicked, and end of story. But there was a lot of things to take away from this campaign that Montgomery was successful at. So if we look at results, people tend to forget that in 1775, things weren't exactly going the best for the colonies. He provided some very, very badly needed victories. Chambly, St. John's, and then getting up to Quebec itself. These are major accomplishments. His name is known. He bought the revolution time. About a year for them to strengthen their resolve, to strengthen their forces. The British are worried about him. They cannot start making incursions into New York and New England, either from them or from native tribes. George Washington had the British Army under Gage bottled up in Boston and had allowed him to continue to focus on that. He didn't have to worry about his back door. Now, Britain, their planning is complicated. This throws their timing off. What are we going to do for the rest of the war? One of the results is those reinforcements that Carleton got, they were supposed to go to Gage in Boston. So Gage's army, which eventually became Howe's, was much weaker than it could have been when it started fighting Washington around New York City. So there's a very famous American historian, a fellow by the name of Don Higginbottom, who I had the honor to meet when he was the visiting professor at West Point. He lived right upstairs from us, one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He's unfortunately passed away. But he called the Quebec campaign a blessing in disguise. It looked like a loss, but it really did a lot for the colonial cause. Okay, now I've got a few minutes left. I want to spend some time talking a little bit about Montgomery himself. I mentioned the idea of reluctancy. And I've got a series of quotes here that sort of demonstrate this. He wrote a lot of letters. He wrote a lot when he was in command. And this idea of reluctancy comes through in a number of places. On notes of the War Council, how little purpose I serve here. A letter to Schuyler later in October. I most earnestly request to be suffered to retire. Should better stand on such a footing as this winter. Permit me to go off with honor. I have not the temper or the talents for such a command. He wants to go home. Writes to his wife in November, I wish most anxiously to drop into my former obscurity. You're writing to Philip Schuyler again, I must go home. If I walk by the side of the lake, I am weary of power. Again, lacking the temper. And then finally to his brother-in-law, having lost the ambition Having lost the ambition which once actuated me as a soldier, it is now a drudgery of duty. One of the things that needs to be pointed out here, though, is all of these kind of negative feelings, he shared them in the letters. He did not let his subordinates see this. And his subordinates were willing to follow him. I mean, think about this. Montgomery is launching an attack on a fortified position in the middle of a blizzard with soldiers whose enlistment is getting ready to run out the next day. Nobody really complained. Most soldiers said, hey, we'll follow this guy. He had braved death a number of occasions. There were 4 cases during this campaign where he escaped death by a hair's breadth. Twice at St. John's and then twice outside of Quebec. In all cases where an artillery shell landed right next to him, others were hurt or killed, he was not. Once, it took the coattails off his coat, knocked him to the ground. And it was after that occasion that he started getting a little bit more fatalistic with his letters to Janet. He always tended to throw in the comment, if I survive. Now, just one other little quote here. I wanted to point this out because this is the last letter he wrote. He wrote it to Janet on December the 18th. I think myself the most fortunate of men in that nothing so much as that malice has not yet attacked my character. If they will hold her hand a little longer, I think I shall be wise enough to get out of her way. Again, expressing the idea of wanting to be an honorable man and wanting to get back home to his wife. He was recognized as a very talented individual. He was promoted by the Continental Congress to the rank of Major General on the 18th of November. He never learned of that promotion. He therefore became the highest ranking American soldier to die during the American Revolution. But when he passed away, now we get into, and this is the final part, I promise. I want to talk a little bit about his legacy. Because being the first one that he died, he was the first real martyr that the Americans had. He was, within a month of his death, Congress had authorized a memorial to him. This is down at St. Paul's Trinity Church in New York City, down there by the 9/11 museum. It didn't actually get put in until the 1780s, but it was authorized less than a month after he died. He is being portrayed as the classic hero, the brave hero, the true patriot. He is a proponent of independence. And much of the myth-making that went into making American history in this first 50 years after the Revolution focused on Montgomery doing this. In 1776, no less a figure than Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet called A Dialogue Between the Ghost of General Montgomery, just arrived from the Elysian Fields, and an American delegate in a wood near Philadelphia. And I'll let you read this, but it talks about him. I would rather die attempting to obtain the permanent freedom for a handful of people than survive a conquest which would only serve to extend the empire of despotism. This is the words that are being put into his mouth. These are the words of patriotism to try to inspire a generation. And Paine knew how to do this. The final depiction I want to show is this comment about General Wolfe. In 1759, the British attacked Quebec during the 7 Years' War. Montgomery was not at this battle. The commander of the British forces, General Wolfe, was killed in the attack. And a somewhat famous painting was painted in 1770 that depicted the death of General Wolfe. Right after the American Revolution, as we're still going through this myth-making, this image is still very powerful. And so John Trumbull in 1786 painted the death of General Montgomery in the attack on Quebec. Now, there's a lot of similarities between these two paintings. One of the ones I just want to highlight is, you see the flag here. You know, we still have a flag. But the thing that's different about this, which adds a new dimension to the way Montgomery is viewed, take a look at the flags. They're almost in the position of a cross, adding a very holy and spiritual dimension to the death of Montgomery, despite the fact that his death looked nothing like this in real life. In 1818, as the generation of Revolutionary War heroes are passing away, New York decides they're going to bring his remains back home. And in February, they authorize his remains to come home. They aren't sure, though, of where he was buried. Could be a problem. But, you know, as luck would have it, there's a gentleman living in Quebec, 89 years old, a fellow by the name of James Thompson, who was one of the ones that buried him. He is of sound mind and body. He knows exactly where Montgomery is buried, and he is able to take folks to the grave very easily. He is disinterred on the 16th of June. He's put on a boat and transported along the route that he traveled down toward Albany. Arrives in Albany on the 4th of July, 1818, lies in state for 2 days, and then sails down the Hudson River. On the 7th of July, he ends up across from Montgomery Place. Now, what's Montgomery Place? Let's go back to Janet. Janet had a really, really rough 1775. On the 15th of December, her father passed away. 2.5 weeks later, on the 3rd of June, 1776, her grandfather Beekman passed away, who had been very, very good to the family. And less than a week later, she found word of the death of her husband. She felt compelled to finish building Grassmere, which she did. Lived there for a few years, but wanted to build a new place that was much more of a shrine dedication to her late husband. So she built Montgomery Place. This is up on the campus of Bard College right now. And she was residing there when the Richmond, the ship carrying her husband's body, came down the Hudson River. She'd been told when the ship would pass her location. And when the ship got in front of, this is taken from the back patio of Montgomery Place, she came out onto the balcony to watch the ship. The ship parked in the middle of the river, fired a 21-gun salute. The band played the Dead March, and then it continued on its trip to New York City. Janet probably went inside and fainted. She never remarried, though one of the interesting things is she was actually proposed to by another Revolutionary War general, a guy by the name of Horatio Gates, which I'm guessing a number of you have heard of. Gates was the victor at Saratoga. Friendly with them, had been friendly with Montgomery before the war. His wife died in 1782. 1784, he struck up a relationship, proposed to Janet. She rejected it. Doesn't sound like any harm lost. The two continued to correspond, and he got married to somebody else a couple of years later. She would not abandon her husband's memory and always called him my general, my soldier, for the rest of her life. So, I'm going to take up before I go any further, I want to talk about one little thing, and I know I'm rambling a little bit here, but doing this project, one of the things that I really learned was about Montgomery and leadership. He is a fascinating individual. And as I look at this campaign, and the initial reaction is this is a failure, but you can't think of it that way. It's not so much as why did they fail, but how in the world did they succeed for as long and as well as they did? And it was to his leadership. Tremendous administrative skill, tremendous diplomatic skill, almost in the vein of an Eisenhower in World War II, able to keep a strange coalition intact and deal with enemies and neutral parties in a way that made sense. Able to lead an effective operation against some very tricky defensive places to take. And he did it. Now, the final assault on Quebec, well, probably should have factored in his risks a little bit more. As the commander of the army, he should not have been the first person in line charging an enemy position. But the plan itself, a little complex, but it didn't violate any military principles. He was a very talented man, and probably deserves a little bit more recognition than he did. Now, he probably would have left the army after the Quebec campaign if he had survived, but you never know. He could have been a major player. Again, I just want to list the folks to say thank you. Bill, Melody, Wayne, Andy, and everybody at the Historical Society, Cliff, Doris, Nancy Kelly up in Rhinebeck, who really helped us out trying to find the specific location of the Montgomery's house in Rhinebeck when they were building Grassmere. I am more than happy to take any questions if anybody has them.
All right, folks, have a round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you all very, very much. I appreciate you coming out here for this.